Hello everyone. So today we want to present to you PrescrAIbe, a tool that enables safer medication prescriptions with the help of AI. This is me, Viktoria, and my colleague Francesca. Imagine this. You're sitting in your doctor's office and you've just been diagnosed with a condition and your doctor hands you a prescription. Of course you trust their expertise, but what you don't see are the potential hidden risks buried in dense medical leaflets full of complex terms. One of those new medications might not mix well with your existing conditions. And unless your doctor catches it or you somehow spot it yourself, those risks stay hidden. We want to share the story of Marta with you, a story that was reported in a journal of pharmacology. Marta is a 58-year-old woman with a long-standing history of bronchial asthma, well controlled on her current therapy. But lately, she developed an eye disease that slowly causes vision loss. In response, her doctor prescribes her eye drops medication that promises to combat the issue. Within 4 weeks of taking the new medication, she develops acute respiratory failure, severe asthma attack requiring emergency hospital care. Luckily, after intense research, the doctor spotted that the eye drops, something as seemingly harmless as topical medication, had been causing the symptoms in combination with Marta's precondition. Marta withdraws the eye drops and her condition improves and stabilizes. Marta was lucky, but not all patients are as fortunate. In some cases, medication errors like these can lead to devastating, even fatal outcomes.
Prescription errors are more common and more costly than one might think. According to a recent Dutch study, up to 21% of hospital readmissions are linked to medication errors. Beyond the clinical toll, there are also legal risks. In fact, healthcare providers face liability for prescription mistakes. Overall, WHO estimates that every year, $42 billion are lost due to medication errors alone. Yet many of these errors are avoidable. Up to 40% of medication-related readmissions could be prevented. In fact, the root cause of these mistakes is rarely negligence. More often it has to do with information overload. Clinicians are expected to process massive amounts of drug data, to account for patient-specific factors, and to stay up to date with guidelines that are constantly changing. While some digital tools exist, most are poorly integrated into clinical workflows, they lack personalized patient insight and clear regulatory compliance. Additionally, many raise also privacy concerns because they expose sensitive data. In order to address these challenges, we have developed an AI-powered prescription aid that automatically checks a medication against the patient's clinical records. It flags interaction risks and suggests potentially safer alternatives. Our tool integrates with clinical systems that hold patient records using medical data exchange standards. It provides personalized, patient-specific recommendations by analyzing medication data alongside individual patient factors, and it stays transparent. Every suggestion or warning references specific sections of official state-provided medication leaflets and databases for full transparency, so clinicians can see exactly which authoritative information supports each recommendation. The system also automates compliance in the sense that it can be easily updated whenever official medication databases or regulations change.
We also think we have good timing because the EU is currently heavily investing in digital healthcare and stressing the importance of interoperability, safe clinical workflows, and better data integration. So on top of addressing the clinical need, this is also a timely opportunity specifically for the European market. Okay, well, let's come to data and standards. A big part of actually making prescriptions safer is to use the right data. So we have to make a bunch of decisions related to which kind of sources, which kind of standards we wanted to use in our tools. We specifically focus on the interactions between drugs and pathologies. So in order to classify the pathologies, we use the ICD the International Classification of Diseases from the WHO. And as our drug database, we use the IFA database, which is the database from the Italian Medicine Agency. And currently, it's one of the most comprehensive open access drug database in Europe. So it's a national official source, and it's also EU compliant. And to put everything together, we use FHIR, which stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. It's an international, strongly EU-supported standard for medical exchange of patient data between healthcare softwares. And this is exactly what allows us to integrate into clinical workflows.
So let's come to the core of our application, the model architecture. So we started with extracting all of the codes of the different diseases of the World Health Organization disease database, which are in the thousands. So there are 33,000 codes associated with the diseases. And we not only extracted the code that is associated with a disease, but also the name, a description, alternative labels, and information about the parents of the classification. We concatenated this information all together into one big text and created chunks out of this information to make it more manageable. To then transform it into machine-readable format, we transformed it into numbers, so specifically vectors, so some list of numbers, and this is where the meaning of the text is still preserved. So we did this with an embedding model. So basically embedding is just another word for text represented as a vector. We have an example here of a cat. This are just the 4 numbers. This is basically an embedding or a vector of this specific meaning. So we stored all the different conditions and diseases, like the thousands, in a database, in a vector database. But now let's not talk about the diseases anymore. We go to the contraindications, to the drugs, which are prescribed by the doctors. So the doctor prescribes the drug, and we took the leaflet from the specific drug and downloaded it from the Italian Medicines Agency website. This was a PDF that we downloaded or was available to us. So we extracted it, transformed it into Markdown, and extracted the relevant chapter. Not all the chapters are relevant for us because we only need the chapter where the contraindications, so do not take this drug if you have XY, is stated. So this is what we extracted, and then we went a step further. With the help of a large language model, we extracted the exact meaning or the exact wording of the contraindication from the leaflet, checked it against the leaflet so that it's actually in there, and moved on with this contraindication wording. So here the LLM, a large language model, is a neural network that also transforms text into vectors, but also is able to model the relationships between parts of the text, and thus is able to understand where to extract a contraindication from. So having the contraindications, we now have it again as text. So once again, we go the loop and transform it into a vector using the same embedding model as in the workflow above. So now we can bring the 2 strings together. Here we've performed a similarity search. So we compared the vector representation of the contraindication below to the vector representation of the conditions above, where there are thousands of them. So this we did by cosine similarity, so meaning that we compared how similar were the vectors in terms of their direction, not in terms of their magnitude. So this is where we see 2 vectors are pointing in a somewhat similar direction, so this would be considered as similar. So finally, we repeated this process about 700 times because we considered around 700 drugs. And we stored all of this information in a drug-to-disease matrix. And this is where we stored for each drug the relevant conditions that are assigned to the contraindications stated in the leaflet. So once we had this whole matrix, now we can go in and have the medical record of a patient and query against this matrix and look if there's a warning appearing for this specific drug that we're looking for, or maybe there's no warning.
I will walk you through a quick demo of our app. Just as a clarification, this is a demo UI. As I said, we don't mean to have an official interface, but rather to integrate into clinical systems that hold patient records. So this is just for the sake of the demo. But what we're doing is we're using a Python library that simulates calls to such a system, to an EHR system. And for the sake of the demo, we have fetched data from 5 random patients. We fetch their clinical records and we extract specifically the pathologies, the conditions. Each condition is associated to the corresponding official code from the International Classification of Diseases. If we click on the code, we are redirected to the official description of the code on the ICD website. Together with the condition, we also extract the information on when the condition was diagnosed and whether it's flagged as resolved or still ongoing. This allows the clinician to decide whether they want to, what do they want to consider to check for these interactions between the drug and the conditions, whether they want to consider only the conditions that are still active by clicking on persisting condition, or whether they want to consider the entire clinical history of the patient. And now we come to the actual prescription step. Here we can select a drug from a list. This is a list of more than 700 drugs, which is a mock hospital formulary. That's about the size of a hospital formulary. We can select the drug that we want to prescribe to the patient. In most cases, we're not gonna receive a warning, but let's take an example with a warning. Okay, so the system has detected that there is a potentially risky interaction with one of the pathologies of this patient. In this case, anemia, which is listed among the pathologies here. We also return the exact contraindication with respect to this pathology as it is listed in the official leaflet. We put the translation in English here for the purpose of the demo. So it basically says, do not take this medication if you have blood problems, then lists the number of blood problems, among which significant anemia, which is relevant for the disease of the patient. If the clinician wants to dig a little deeper, they can also click on View Leaflet. This is going to automatically download the official leaflet from the database, from the Italian database of drugs. Okay, when we return a warning, we try to go a step further and we try to also suggest potentially safer alternatives. These are drugs that do not return warnings for the specific patient in question and also are listed from best to worst match, but still relevant in terms of overlap in therapeutic indications with the drug that we're considering. So this would be a drug that is potentially safer, doesn't return any contraindication for this patient, but could be used for the same purpose.
Okay. So it's very important in medical applications that they're reliable and accurate. And so far, we looked at random samples of our application at the results and did sanity checks, just as we did here. And by this, we evaluated the app. However, we are not trained healthcare professionals, and we seek feedback from trained healthcare professionals in 2 ways. One of them is already implemented in the app. So if a doctor uses the app, it's able that there's a direct feedback on the contraindication and the condition that is matched. So you can either accept or reject this result, and it's automatically stored in our data. So then there's another way, which is an online survey where we also want to consult trained healthcare professionals to do the same exact thing, to rate a combination of a contraindication of a drug against the condition that it's matched and verify as accepted or rejected. And with this, we plan to go ahead for the further roadmap implementation. So we want to extend our application by further categories. Besides the conditions that we have as of now, we want to extend by allergies, by observations, medications, that are categories that are also part of the FHIR standard. So when we have this, we are also talking about extending for further other types of classification systems. For example, for the allergies, it's the SNOMED classification system that is associated with it. Then if we have incorporated the standard, we aim to go to an alpha version where we can check the results against the feedback from healthcare professionals with the online survey tool, improve our app, and choose the right cutoff parameters from the retrieval system, so to say, when is the end of the relevant documents and where's the start of the irrelevant documents. So finally, if you go to a more advanced test version and a beta version, we aim to get feedback through the interface and the feedback there. And then we aimed for a version release, a rollout in Italy, which would mean partnering with software providers. But this is not the only thing. We can also think about extending the application to other countries, because this would mean connecting international viable classification systems, such as the International Classification of Diseases, to other national drug leaflet databases, for example, in Germany. So that's that. Thank you for your attention.